Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Rogers, and I welcome you to our second webinar on middle school career studies. Today, we're going to look at the planning and implementing of those programs within middle school. With me today is Morgan Lovett. She's handling everything technical for us. Both of us are consultants in the Office of Career and Technical Education, and we've spent a lot of work over the past year diving into middle school career studies. There is a question and answer box for us. So as we go through the presentation, if you find a question that you have, go ahead and put that in the question box. We're going to wait until the end to answer those questions, but if you're like me, if I wait till the end to ask it, I'll probably forget. So do take a moment to do that as we go along. In this webinar, we're going to explore the purpose and the use of the Middle School Career Study Planning and Implementation Toolkit, and how that it can be used to create an intentional career exploration program. In the email with the link to this webinar, I attached this document for you. So if you have that open, it may be helpful for you just to pull that up and maybe look at it in a separate screen. I'll have the images on the screen for you if you don't have that available. All of the resources that we're going to look at today are available on the Middle School Career Studies or Career Resources webpage. If you go to KDE's website and in the search box, just type Middle School Career Resources, it will take you directly to this page. You should be able to see on my image of the web page, over on the right under School Resources, you can see the tool that we are using, the Middle School Planning and Implementation Toolkit. So that's where you can find that if you need to find it later. Before we dive into your local school setting, I want to take just a minute to connect with the first webinar, those design principles. We identified outcomes for student learning. We want middle school students to gain awareness of and exposure to a wide variety of careers. We want to increase their self-awareness and begin to form their potential occupational identity. We want to develop employability skills, and we want them to begin to develop foundational technical skills as appropriate. We want them to be positioned to make better informed educational choices and make that transition to high school with an actionable planned step. There were 10 design principles that SREB and their writing team from stakeholders across the nation identified that should be an essential part of any middle school career studies program. The first one is that it needs to be equitable and inclusive of every student, regardless of background, educational attainment, but it needs to be available for all. It needs to be anchored in careers and standards-based. It needs to be grounded in experiential and hands-on learning, and it needs to be balanced across the depth and the breadth of the curriculum. It also needs to be integrated into the broader K-12, K-16, K-20, however that you identify that, into that broader career development system. It needs to include intentional and meaningful employer engagement, and it needs to involve dedicated instructional time. It also needs to be communicated effectively to students and their families, and it needs to focus on student growth. So these are the principles that we're going to keep in mind as we look through implementing that within our local setting. They also identified 6 programmatic elements that we will talk about in our application to our local setting today. Of course, that is standards and curriculum and assessment. What's the course, the structure? How do we schedule that? What about career advisement? Who owns that? What supports do they need? Experiential learning, where does that occur? What supports do teachers and leaders need to provide that? And of course, the teachers and the leaders, what are their unique needs to implement this? And then data and measurement, how that fits into the development of our program. I want you to take a look at this slide here as we move into what our middle school career studies program could be. I want you to think about what most often that over the years, this is how that it has looked. We know that students usually take an interest survey to identify their interest and to match that to their top career choices. Then students would typically research the career, finding out how much they made, how long they needed to go to school, maybe some of the skills and a little bit about the working environment. And then the next step, students would look to see what colleges offered that major. And that's an important part of the puzzle, but I want you to consider a little different model for this. One of my colleagues who serves in the same role in Maine, they have a totally different approach to middle school career study. Their whole program or philosophy really hinges on this statement that Meg always shared with us. She said, how can students identify their interests and skills unless we provide actual hands-on experiences for them to discover those? So think about what that looks like for your students. We know that students come from a wide variety of background, and their exposure to various careers and even opportunities to do things is varied across all of our different settings. So keep that in mind as we go through our program. Before that we get to the tool, I just want to give you a summary of the middle school career study standards. You may remember that last year the career studies standards were newly revised and approved, and this is just a short summary of that middle school band, but what the writers of the standards with their research and their insight, this is what they feel is important. They think that students need to understand the connection between income, values, interests, and lifestyles and how that connects with a career. They need to talk about the changing workplace. They need to discuss the monetary and the time cost of preparing for a career. They also need to explore the skills and the tasks that are related to the Kentucky career clusters and pathways of interest to them. They also need to explore the opportunities at that secondary level that they have the opportunity to earn dual and articulated credit, industry certifications, work-based learning, internships, all of those opportunities to gain real-world experience and really decide this is something that I want to invest my time in. They also wanted to highlight that connection between academic skills and the technical skills and the careers that they may choose later in life. They also wanted students to consider how things that they're doing now, extracurricular activities, community experience, volunteer work, all of those serve a purpose, and not only does it develop their academic and technical skills, but it also builds their essential skills or employability and leadership skills. And all of this is a crucial part as they begin to create and maintain their ILP or their individual learning plan. The image that you see here really dives into how this might possibly look across that K-12 spectrum. Most of us are familiar with what's happening in high school, where students can earn industry certifications and those types of things. But that middle school level, it's really a whole new avenue of us to approach middle school career studies. So looking at the middle school development along this continuum, of course, we want to provide opportunities to explore career clusters and pathways. The instruction should be integrated with exploratory tasks, problem-based learning units, including student career and technical organization, and of course, a focus on the individual learning plan. And then the real world experiences that you'll see here in the bottom, we're going to talk about those a little bit more in depth as we dive into the toolkit. So the toolkit is located on the KDE webpage. And there are 5 sections that we're going to walk through today. The first will be a school review. We're going to look at considerations that you need to keep in mind for planning. We're going to look at a planning tool, and we're also going to look at some exploration models. How might we make career exploration accessible for all students in our school? And there's going to be a glossary just of to define some of these terms, because we know that middle school teachers are experts in math and science and English, but we don't expect them to be experts in CTE. So this just defines that language and gives us a common place to work from. So the first thing that you want to consider doing, as with anything, is to identify a small team. These are some recommended partners that would provide good insight and have good input for your team. Of course, you need an administrator, counselors, and teachers, both academic and CTE teachers. The CTE teacher may be a middle school CTE teacher, or they may be someone from the high school that has, if you don't have a middle school teacher there at your school, you may want a parent or two and community partner, someone who is from the business and industry world that is common to your local area, that can provide insight in what they need from employees when they begin to work. And the second piece is to really make sure that everyone understands the goal of middle school career studies and the language of career exploration, because this is probably going to be new material, new language for most of these individuals. When I decided on my planning team, I would really consider how can I build their understanding of this language, this new world. So you may do that by sharing the webinars. Either of these documents can be helpful, and even the toolkit. If you've got to look at that, you'll see that there is some planning material, some front matter that helps to break down that barrier of language and resources. So consider how that you might want to do that. This is the layout of the planning and implementation toolkit. We're going to look first at the front matter that really breaks down what is middle school career studies. It's important for all stakeholders. Stakeholders, I mean anyone who is interested in this work. But it's really important that individuals understand what middle school career studies is and what it is not, because until we have that understanding, it's hard for us to consider some of these options. So middle school career studies is not about tracking students into pathways based on predetermined criteria. Instead, it's about encouraging students to explore a variety of career clusters related to their individual interest. It is not requiring students to choose one career, but instead, we want to provide opportunities to explore authentic skills, tasks, and topics that's related to a specific career cluster that they might find interesting. And of course, it is never about choosing a career instead of a college, but it's recognizing that almost all career paths require ongoing education and experience. Some of those will be a 4-year degree, some will be a 5-year, some will be a doctorate. Some may be a 2-year degree, some may be a 1-year degree, but helping students determine what that path looks like for them based on their interest and their circumstances and what they want to do with their life. This document here is linked from the toolkit if you're looking at it in a PDF, and I'll share this link when I send out the follow-up from this webinar. But ACTE is the Association of Career and Technical Educators, and they recommend incorporating career-related project-based learning in the classroom. And this is kind of a different mindset for us because most project-based learning can be connected to some career cluster, but it's just helping teachers to understand where that fit may be. So implementing career studies may not be it's not going to be a whole big mind shift for your school, but it's looking at targeted ways where we can make that connection between the classroom and the real world. They also recommend projects and activities to develop employability skills. They recommend that we are flexible when we're providing those exploratory and introductory CTE courses. They recommend that we facilitate academic and career planning with scalable online tools for students to use. They also recommend short-term interactions with business and community leaders, as well as providing opportunities for students to participate in career and technical student organizations, and even providing some financial support for those as needed. So we're going to dive into the school review. So this is in the toolkit, so hopefully you may have this in front of you. But the purpose of this is to be able to look at your school, identify what is happening in the way of career studies, where there may be gaps, maybe where that you want to focus your next step on. So this can be used either of two ways. Because middle school, we're looking at that 6th to 8th grade band. You may want to have 3 different copies of this, one specifically for 6th grade, one for 7th, and one for 8th. Or you may choose just a color code, where it may get a little sticky sometimes. We know that students are probably in all of the grades. We always update their interest inventories, kind of get them to see how they've grown over the course of a year. So you may find some of this stuff happening in each grade. So you decide what would work best for you, but I'm going to walk you through and define some of these terms and give you a few tips on how to use this. So self-awareness is just that student's opportunity to look within to determine what they might like and what they don't. It is useful for students to do this each year because they're going to discover something new about themselves all the time. So helping them to see how they've grown and what they've discovered and how that will change options that they may have considered before. And then I want you to think about what opportunities that they have to explore specific careers. Do they know what a career cluster is? Looking at 6th grade, probably very little, but by the time they get to 8th grade, we want students to be able to speak this language. We want them to know what a career pathway is, what an industry certificate is. So the things that you see under career exploration, career clusters, career pathways, their industry credentials, do they know much about those? Do they know about work-based learning? All of these, this should be a very strong yes by the 8th grade level. Over here, we're just introducing 6th grade students. The exploratory tasks that we'll talk about in a few moments, these should be happening, or an exploratory experience should begin to happen pretty often in 6th grade and moving on up. So this section deals with career exploration. What exposure do they have to different career clusters and the skills and the knowledge that's required for those. The next section deals with real-world learning experiences. Now, a word of caution here, because this is going to go from very general, that takes very little time and resources from a school, to ones that take substantial amounts of planning and financial resources. So the expectation is not that every school implement every one of these. By no means is that the message. But we wanted to provide as many options that we could find across the nation that was happening in middle school CTE to give you ideas. What would work best for you? So as we go through here, we know that this is a long-term building of a middle school career study program, but just take this as some options that you may see. Career portfolios, guest speakers, those are self-explanatory. Career fairs, think about those that are led by business and industry. It's different from a college fair where colleges come in and recruit students. These are business and industry partners who come in, set up stations or booths. They may bring some type of activity, some tool relevant to their field to engage the students. But it's about business and industry recruiting students to move into that pathway or that field. Business and industry tours, we know that's fairly common for most of us. And most middle schools at some time will take their students to the high school or the ATC, the local CTE school, whatever your local area calls it. But there's two different ways that we can do that. The first is just observation only. There is no hands-on, so you don't have to worry about safety issues and preparation for students. This is good for 6th and 7th grade students, just to let them see what's happening. And it takes a lot less planning than one where students will be a little bit more engaged. We've already mentioned problem-based learning projects, but students research a problem or an issue that's related to a career cluster. So think about how that may be used. A career exploration exhibit is something that students can host, especially students 7th and 8th grade, as they have had time over the 6th and 7th grade to explore a career cluster of their interest. This is an exhibit that they, instead of the business partner providing an activity or a resource or information about a career, this is where the students themselves, 7th and 8th grade students, actually share that information in a career exhibit for younger students, maybe 6th grade students, maybe even elementary students. Does take a little bit of planning, does not take a lot of resources, and it builds those communication skills as students have to share their work with an authentic audience. We know that we have school-based enterprises, and this can range from greenhouses or stores. A lot of schools have a communication program that students can help with the newsletters, announcements, web pages. All of those things are giving students experience to a career cluster or building skills that are useful in all of the career clusters. We'll come back to the tour of the CTE school or program. If you decide to allow those students to actually do some hands-on experience, that does take a little bit of work and planning because we have a lot of safety regulations and things, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. You might find that there is some mentorship or job shadowing that's going on in your school or local area, and that might include CTE students at the high school. It may include business or industry partners. So think about what is happening or what might happen in the future. Other options that we see are advisor, advisee, enrichment, and mentoring programs. So these may be grouped by career cluster to allow for deeper exploration, and we'll look at some models of this later. But are you doing anything in your school with those periods, those blocks of time, if you have that you're actually bringing in some career exploration? Now, a note here, at middle school, it does not have to be a career studies lesson every day. When we talk about these experiences, we're talking about a systematic plan over the course of a year that the student will have opportunities to participate in at different times through the year. It may be once a week, every 2 weeks, once a month, but how do you plan for that? So keep that in mind. We know that a lot of schools offer a CTE program at the middle school. This can actually be family and consumer science, agriculture, technology, or maybe just a career studies course that the students take, and they're exposed to several of these different careers. There are some regions that they will have a CTE traveling teacher. The teacher may travel from middle school to middle school, or there may be an area technology center that sends one of their teacher to the middle school for one period a day. Lots of different options and models for that, and it's how you can best use those resources in your local area. We know that a lot of areas have camp experiences. These may be in the summer or in the evening, and they range from being a single day, students go into a single program. It may be a single day and students rotate through multiple programs, or it may be like a week-long experience. Some of those week-long experiences, students may stay in one single program the entire week. Others, they may rotate through multiple programs, possibly based on what their interests are. And one last piece of this school review that is really important because of who's going to be implementing most of this, and we know that teachers are going to be the ones that are doing a lot of this work. And even with the career advising, we know that counselors wear so many hats within our schools that teachers are really in the position to have those one-on-one career conversations with our students. So as you work through this school review, think about what the needs of your teachers are. Do they understand what career studies, the standards are, and how to integrate those real-world applications in their content areas? Do they understand the purpose of individual learning plan and how that can really be leveraged to create an effective plan for students as they move into high school? Do they have an understanding of what career clusters are, that these are contextual frameworks that designate skills that's specific to a specific career, and that each career cluster contains multiple pathways? And we know that there's about 80 pathways among all the clusters, and these represent every job that you could imagine. So it's certainly not limiting students to one career, but it's really helping to open their minds to what those possibilities are. Middle school teachers may not be aware of what industry certifications are. They probably are not very familiar with dual and articulated credit, and how that students have lots of opportunities to begin to build their career journey as they move into high school, and that the more strategic that they are, the more that they can be better, that they can be prepared for the future. And then are the teachers familiar with the career pathway options that are available for students at the local high school or the technology center? So building teachers learning from this is a fairly easy, it's not like an all-day training. We have several frequently asked questions document that you'll find under the school resources on the Middle School Career Studies webpage. So fairly easy to build teacher background knowledge for these topics. The next document or the next section that you'll see will be the planning considerations. Because some of these concepts may be new to you, we've tried to at least give you an idea of things to consider. What's the time commitment? What personnel may be involved? Is there a budget need for this? And then what is that planning consideration? Some things requires very little planning. Others you will need to start before the school year even begins. So consider that, and we know that all great programs begin with the first step. So again, don't feel overwhelmed. Consider what the next step for your school would be, and that's where your best work will be tailored to. This continues on for what are the considerations for the real-world learning experiences. And you see that as we move through here, the time commitment grows substantially longer. The planning requirements becomes a lot more intense as we consider different options. So this is all there for you to look at and to consider in the toolkit. And again, just the last section of this, those really focused real-world learning experiences for students. And then following that, we have a planning tool. All of these are in the same order so that you can move easily from one document to the other. You can move easily from the school review. If you're unsure about what something is, you should be able to find that easily in the planning considerations, and then you can take that information into the tool to really target and hone in on your next step. So this is like any planning tool that we use. It's identifying what that you want to use. Maybe you're interested in incorporating exploratory tasks into just everyday content areas. So when, is that something you're looking at for the fall or maybe the spring? Are you going to start with one content area? Who's going to be responsible for this? So just kind of helping you think through and develop a plan for your next steps. And then we want to consider, once you've identified a few steps that you're interested in, what that's going to look like. So we have 3 different samples, 3 different models of how that schools across the state, as we talk to people, everyone does it differently, and that's wonderful. So these are purely samples, but I'm going to walk you through some of this and just maybe get you thinking about what might work best for you. The purpose of this is to really connect the classroom with real-world experiences, and we know that doing so really can serve to motivate and engage students. So when we can incorporate tasks and skills and topics and problems that are related to a career cluster, that helps them to see that why that I need to study this. It can be a problem-based learning unit over the course of a few weeks, or it may be an exploratory task, which we'll look at in just a slide because it's something that is new to Kentucky. So again, this is one model if you want to consider the scope of the 16 career clusters and that you want to provide access for all students to at least have conversations and experience something that someone may do in that career cluster. So you'll see that this is divided up into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade years. I have listed language arts, math, all of those content areas on the site. And I just connected some of these clusters to the program areas. It's once your teachers get into these connections, it's very easy to find connections between our content areas and the clusters, but just begin aware of that takes a little bit of conversation and prompting and guidance to see how that we can do that. We know that math teachers always bring in some finance, and even in geometry they'll bring in some architecture and construction problems. But how can your teachers, sometime over the course of their year, how can they bring in some type of task, PBL, or experience for students to connect with the skills that's happening in that cluster? We know in the science world, so much of the inquiry and things that we see really relates to multiple career clusters. As we think, I've listed agriculture, health sciences, and STEAM, but we know that that crosses into architecture and manufacturing, all of those types of topics. We know that social studies, their content really hits hard on the economy, government, how our social society works. All of those is a perfect launching ground for a short unit to introduce a task that's related to one of these clusters. Technology hits technology and marketing, all of those things. Even language arts, as we think about the new the reading and writing standards, where that a huge percentage of the text that students read, explore, and write are information-based. That is the perfect opportunity for students to read, research, and compose or create some type of written product based on a career cluster that they are interested in. So think about how that might work, or if that's something that might work for your school. Now I want to introduce you to that term that I've mentioned a couple times. These are exploratory tasks. We've always talked about connecting the content area to the real world. But because we live in two different worlds, we're typically either a content teacher, social studies or math or science, or a CTE teacher. It's hard to bridge that ground sometimes. And it's also difficult to take what's happening at the adult level or even the high school level. How do we provide an experience for students at middle school that is developmentally appropriate and safe for students? So these exploratory tasks were designed to be an optional experience for students. There is one for each of the 16 career clusters. The goal of this is to promote active learning by engaging the students with career-specific skills, knowledge, or task of their choice. There is here on the left-hand side, this is just a picture of the web page. So if you go to the Middle School Career Studies web page, you will find this here, and there is a task for each cluster. There is an interest survey for students. There are resources and reflection sheets, all of the tools that you may need. Here is a sample of the law, public safety, corrections, and security exploratory task. You may share this with the student. This may be strictly for the teacher to build their understanding and to give them an idea of, here is a task related to the law enforcement services pathway that I might engage my students in. There will be an exploratory task and an extension for each of the pathways. These dark green bars are the 5 pathways that are found in law, public safety, corrections, and security. These can be modified, the product can be modified, but giving teachers an idea of a task that might be relevant to someone that's interested in working in corrections or working with the EMT system. So take some time and explore that. And in our third webinar, we're really going to dive into conversations about this deeper integration into the content areas. We'll go back to the exploration model. This is an advisory time model, but this might be a time that teachers can integrate a career clustered activity or an experience into advisory time throughout the year. Of course, we know that advisory time is limited, so you would never want to do a task that's going to require hours and hours of instructional time, but how that we can introduce something for the students. How you divide that up to provide access to all of the career options for students really depends on you and then to your resources, but simply a template model that you may want to consider. The last model that we have is interest-based, and this would work best for an enrichment period that occurs regularly throughout the school year. We'll look at this career cluster interest survey in a moment, but this would be where the students would take a career cluster interest survey. They would identify their top 2 or 3 clusters of interest. A teacher or more would be responsible for one of these cluster areas with each of the enrichment periods and providing that experience for the student, whatever that may look like. It may be a guest speaker, it may be one of the exploratory tasks, it may be a video, but focusing and helping the students understand what's happening in that career cluster. Here is the career cluster inventory that I just mentioned. It again is on the middle school resources page that you see here on the left, and there is an online version of this or a paper version that you can print out as well. The results that students get from this does not give them like most of them do. A physical therapist is a good fit for you, a machinist is a good fit for you, but rather it just gives them that career cluster, that broader picture to allow them to look a little deeper rather than focusing on one career at middle school, because that's really not appropriate for most of our middle school students. And then we provide that experience, however that your school chooses to do it, whether it's integrated into content classrooms, it's an advisory, it's an enrichment period, or it may be in a career studies class that students take every day. But helping them to reflect on what did I like to do, or what did I like about learning about something in that career cluster. So in this on the web page, there will be reflection sheets for each of the career clusters, and they simply says, yes, I like to do this, no, I didn't, or I'm not really sure. And that's going to be the case for most of our middle school students. What they do with these results, if they have mostly yeses, this is one that they may kind of want to investigate further, maybe some summer opportunities for students or even on their own. If they checked no big worries. Lots of different options for them, and that's what we want them to do, is to explore on our dime rather than on their dime or their parents' dime when they're in college. And maybe they checked maybe most often. Again, no problem. Just keep looking, keep those conversations going. Also on the page, and we'll look at this a little bit deeper in our next webinar, resources that I mentioned that can support teacher, and not just teacher, but parents and community partners about what is happening in the world of career studies. Short, one-page, front and back documents. And as we begin to wrap up, I know there's a lot of questions that we all have about middle school career studies. What if students aren't interested in a task related to a career cluster? Let's say that a science teacher is doing some things and it really relates heavily to agriculture. So she wants to pull out and really make that connection to careers in agriculture. We know that all students aren't going to be interested in agriculture. However, I want you to think and help your teachers and students think broader. Even though a student may be participating in an agriculture task, have them, especially those that are not interested in agriculture, have them think about what clusters touch agriculture. What business practices are essential to agriculture? What manufacturing clusters or careers are essential to agriculture careers? How does finance play a part in it? And an interesting one with GPS and technology today, how is that changing the world of agriculture? So even though we may be providing an experience for students on a cluster, if they're not interested in it, it's okay. How do others, maybe something that they're interested in, how can that match up? And you take any cluster that you want and put here in this big circle. We're going to have lots of connections, and I only chose 6 just because of space. So think about that and kind of mull that over and how that it might look for your students. Here's one that's a consideration. What if the local high school does not offer that pathway? We know that Kentucky focuses on developing programs that offer pathways that are high skill, high demand, and high wage, because we want them to earn a living wage when they get out of school. However, we know that there are a lot of hundreds of other careers. So if a school does not offer that, we don't want to limit students' choices. Have them to think about. I've put a lawyer here just for instance. What are the supporting academic classes that they need? Definitely English, social studies, speaking, all of those things. Are there some supporting CTE classes? Maybe the student has a secondary interest in something else. We know that lawyers, they specialize in business, finance, the healthcare field, industry. So always keep those options open for students. CTSOs are a wonderful way for students to build those essential skills: communication, writing, presentations, problem solving, all of those things that we need across careers that can definitely be a part of the individual learning plan for a student who's going to be a lawyer. Are there work-based learning options for students as they, enter into 11th and 12th grade years? Are there places that they can intern in a lawyer's office? So think about that more broadly and individualized to the student as you begin to have those career conversations with your students. And what if students are interested in a career that really we know has a very limited growth potential? I'm sure that middle school teachers and counselors hear that their students want to be sports stars or music stars, all of those things. They have these passions, and we don't want to burst their bubble, but we also want to have those conversations. That is wonderful, but we always need to have a secondary plan. So maybe you're interested in sports. If this does not work out, what could you do that's related to the sports world? Think of those last 2 bubbles that I shared with you. We know that within the sports world, we have marketing, we have coaches, we have advertising, we have financial people, lots of different options. So we want those conversations to be happening instead of saying, oh, you can't do it. But what might, if you can't make a living here, what would be your second choice? And then finally, what about online learning? We know that online learning technology is a valuable tool to research. We know that students can see things that we just can't do in the middle school classroom. And in this world of the pandemic, it's also opened up the possibilities for us to collaborate with people at other schools or in the business and industry world. Think about a guest speaker that maybe can't make it to your classroom, but they could have a conversation with your students virtually. And that can also go for a field trip as well. And it can also be a valuable tool to document and share learning experiences as students begin to build their ILP. As valuable as a tool that this is, I would caution anyone from relying solely on technology because we need those conversations with the students. And even a lot of the tasks and experiences that the student may do may involve technology. We still need to have those conversations with the students as they're moving through this. And I'm going to pause for a few minutes. I know that I have provided a ton of information, and it may be too soon for questions. But Morgan, has there been any questions to come through or things that we need to address?
There's been a statement so far from Carla. She said, I am a credentialed certified career service provider, and I am so excited for this implementation. I work with KEDC, which I had to clarify from her. That's
yes,
yes, Kentucky Educational Development Corporation. Yeah. And they have a career platform that is on point with career studies.
Yes, yes. They've been doing quite a bit of work there, so we're excited to hear that that's going on.
And that is all on my end.
Okay. Well, as you work through this material over the next few weeks, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Morgan. We would love to schedule some time to meet with you if that would be best, or email, whatever works best for you. We are always here to support you and to have those conversations because we know that this is difficult work. However, if you remember the why from the first webinar, boy, there are some major whys that we need to keep in front of us. We will be sending these resources out in a follow-up email tomorrow, but I did want to let you know of an upcoming webinar that I'm really excited about. This is with the Southern Regional Education Board, and if you joined the first webinar, you know that Judy talked to us briefly about some middle school STEM curriculum that they have. There's going to be a webinar on February the 16th at 5 p.m. To learn about that. So there is a link here. I know it's hard to access from here, but I'll send that out tomorrow. And I really encourage you to look at that because, as we said in the last webinar, these modules that SREB has created, they cross so many career clusters, and they include academic support for literacy and math, as well as the background for the teachers to build their knowledge. So it's a wonderful resource that I hope that you may be able to take advantage of. Coming up in March, this will probably be mid to late March, we are going to do our third webinar. And this is going to dive into what this looks like on the teacher side of it. We're going to look a little closer at the exploratory task. We're going to look at what integrating some of those clusters into content areas, what that might look like. So it's basically going to be sharing a lot of information, posing some questions to consider. But if you're on this webinar, you'll be getting a link to this coming up a couple weeks before the webinar is scheduled. So do look for that. And as always, it will be recorded and shared with you if you're unable to make it. Again, if you have any questions or conversations, please reach out to myself Here is my email address as well as Morgan's. Pamela Moore is our director, and she can point you into the right direction also. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're really invested in this work and excited to see what that it's going to mean for our students in the next few years. So thank you so very much, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Oh, yes, ma'am.
We had somebody else with another question. I'm not sure if you know the answer to this or can maybe point them in the right direction. Lisa wanted to know if the KEDC has resources to share and wanted to know if the curriculum costs money.
Okay. I do not know that question, but I will reach out to KEDC and get that information, and it may be a couple days before I get back to you on that as I contact and talk to those at KEDC. So, but I will send out information just as soon as I have it, okay? I know for the SREB curriculum, I know there is a cost, but they provide the training for the teachers, and compared to other programs for STEM work, the cost is comparably less. So I don't know the specifics on the numbers, but if you're looking at that option, you we'll know more about that in a week. So, anything else, Morgan?
That's it.
Okay, well, thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again for all the work that you do for our students. Bye-bye.